clap on my end.
I think mine too, but I was holding my phone in my hand and I slapped my forearm and almost dropped my phone. I was too lazy to sit down my phone. I was like, oh, I'll just slap my forearm real quick. Damn near dropped my phone on a glass table. You hear a whole crashing in the background. It'd been like a Tom and Jerry cartoon. What happened to you over there? Nah, let's keep going. Talk about this.
Don't worry about it. Stuff. Don't worry about it. Let's keep going.
So today's topic is component maintenance cost.
Ooh.
So this is a document by, it's called Best Practices for Component Maintenance Cost Management.
Ooh. I feel like this is going to be a real gut check for a lot of people.
So, the introduction to this says, what is components maintenance cost? Well, components maintenance cost, or CMC, are a major issue for maintenance departments in airlines all over the world. And according to the Airline Maintenance Cost Executive Summary for fiscal year, this is 2014, components make up the second largest portion, or 24% of airlines' direct maintenance costs.
Ooh. Yeah, I can believe that, because I mean, how are you? I
always tell everybody. I'm like, hey, if you're gonna, I'm thinking about getting into aviation. What should I do? I'm like, oh, get into the parts manufacturing business. If you can buy in on something like that, holy cow!
Yeah, or just any one of that whole chain of events from idea to installation. If you can do any of number of those, you'd be in it to win it. Like, real easy, because like we just said, 24% of all maintenance cost is for the component themselves. And as we've all seen in our experiences, it doesn't fly. If you don't have the component, it's not flying.
Right. And, I think we all run into this on a, sad to say, but daily basis.
Yes.
At least it's that way for me, it feels like.
Yes. Especially when you have an airframe that's so old and those parts, they're either not made anymore or they're being refurbished so many times. And it's like on its last leg for an overhaul. And you can kind of see it like that. Like, it's like kind of shady. We should probably like either get new old stuff or get a whole new plane with at least a little bit more of a, what do you say? A time span or a life cycle to it.
Right. I mean, in many cases, parts aren't made anymore, and you just got to, hopefully you can find a refurbishment center who will take the parts, take them back to zero hours, and you can continue flying it. But I mean, even that you can only do so many times.
Right. And continue on with this article, is compared to the impact of CMC on overall maintenance spend, little effort has been made so far to standardize methods to break them down into subcategories suitable for benchmarks. Ooh, that's a pretty big gut check right there.
So in best practices on how to deal with weaknesses in existing arrangements with suppliers and or original equipment manufacturers, i.e. the OEMs. So what's funny about that is I'm currently going through, a corrective action for a similar situation, that was, issued out, but unfortunately, very limited on getting the product because it's a single source manufacturer, right? And that's for so many things in aviation. I mean, they're single source manufacturers, and if there's multiple platforms and programs or companies utilizing that product, well, depending on the priority of your product, your asset and how it falls in the ranking system, that's how fast you'll get it, right? So that's been a big issue, but also adding the constraints of these COVID times. So these manufacturers will also minimize their manning at any one point in time just to prevent illness from spreading or whatever else. But so if you had 10 people making this product and now you got, working 7 days a week, but now you got 5 and they're working 3 days a week, obviously that's going to limit the production of whatever this part, component, product, has, material, whatever you're after. It's just added constraints, and, you have to build contingency stocks into your supply. Most places have a contingency stock, but you also have to account for, you know, you also have to look at factors like, okay, well, what if we, we built our contingency stock based off of our usage history. Well, what if we added 3 more lines to Chicago this year than we had last year, which is now that's pulling from our contingency, but also back to that single source vendor and producer of parts, components, has whatever. You're not able to backfill your contingency, right? So you've depleted your main supply, you've depleted your contingency, you're not able to backfill, right? You run into these issues that drive up your CMC.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's funny you mentioned it because as you were talking about like depleting your contingency stock and then using your history to determine what your contingency is, you brought up a very great example because like maybe your history for like a 3-year period was very bad. Like it was very slow for you. So like, okay, our contingency is, let's make up a number, 10% of our main stock, whatever. It's not realistic, but let's just throw a number. Mm-hmm. And then you all of a sudden, like your business starts booming and then you added three extra lines to Chicago, Miami, wherever. And then now your usage history just like tripled. And you're going to, like you said, you're going to burn through it all. Your contingency stock's going to blast through. And then by the time you figure out the cost predictability of it, you've already overshot your usage goal by a whole lot. And then you're going to start leading to what a lot of us have now, where you have fleets that are down, you have aircraft that are waiting parts for how long already. And then you start playing, this bleeds into the cannibalization piece where like, we're going to take semi decent parts from old planes and then stick them into kind of sort of old, maybe just as old aircraft and just hope we don't break anything on the way out or on the way in. Right.
But even then, that only buys you so much time until that part goes zero time for maintenance. And then you're right back into the boat, right? So that, the canning in that instance might only buy you, depending on how many hours you're flying per month, that might only buy you an extra month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever. You still got to figure out the issue of getting parts back in stock.
Right. And I think that's like an issue with a lot of newly minted controllers and cost analysts and decision makers of that nature, is especially with controllers, or some people call them production superintendents or production controllers, whatever the terminology is. I think it's fairly universal. Like whenever a new guy comes and he sees like he has to fill a line and we don't have the parts in stock, or it's going to be so long before we get it, they just think, okay, let's just cannibalize it, or let's remove it from one shelf to another. And they do that enough times and they don't keep track, or they don't keep accurate track of the flight time or the usage time. And then they ended up like doing a flight and they overshoot it by well beyond its deviation percentage. And then now like they're air quote illegally flying a part that's supposed to have been due like however many some flight hours ago.
Yeah, exactly. Now here's another added aspect that could also drive up your percentages for CMC. What if you're only allowed to have so many of a specific part on site? Ooh. You're limited by airfield regulations, state regulations, federal regulations, military regulations, whatever the case is. So you're only allowed to have so many on site, but because of the nature of the part, it's got to be kept in a specific area, not allowed to be kept within your own supply warehouse.
Yes. Oh man.
But you're also not the only dog in the fight that uses that product.
Yes.
Right. So that area that holds those parts or products, when they get an order in, they're only allowed to have 25, let's say, of this component on site. Mm-hmm. And there's 5 different programs, different platforms, but use the same part, right?
Yep.
And it's like first come, first serve, or depending on the priority of your program, if you're number 4 out of 5, number 1 and 2 and 3 are going to eat up all the stuff. And then by the time you get around to needing it, they're like, sorry, we're out.
Right.
And we're waiting. They're like, order more and we'll keep it over here. And you're like, yeah, I've had stuff on order for a long time. Like I was hoping you would have some left for me, and like, yeah, sorry about that. You're not high enough priority.
Yep. And I want to say like certain airlines experience the same thing. Like when I could be wrong about some of the logistics of this, but I noticed like you were saying, like there you can only have so many of a certain part. In some cases, it's something pretty vital, like say like a GPS component or a engine or a transmission, a prop, something very important. But you can only carry so much of it, like for reasons, and you can't keep it in the same area as where your service units are, and then you're sharing this with like 25, 10 or 15 so airlines, and whoever puts the order in first is the one who gets it, or whoever pays more to air quote reserve it has the priority. And so like run into an issue where like you have to replace an engine or an engine component, which is seriously time tracked and it's very time sensitive for these things. And it's you and airline X are trying to buy this, so you gotta like almost outbid each other to see who gets the part first, where it's the same overall goal where you're just trying to install something onto an engine and have it fly and make revenue.
Yes.
So
yeah, like you said engines, I believe, and that is a big one. Like you can't keep, at least for where I'm at, we cannot keep replacement engines within the same operating realm as the vehicles themselves, right? They have to be kept in a separate building,
right?
Whatever else. But again, we're not the only game in our area that utilize that. So, you know, we're hey, we got to replace the motor because of X, Y, and Z reasons. Okay, well, we only have 2 motors left in stock, and one's actually due for a service bulletin, so we can't issue it out, and the other one's awaiting a part that we canned off of it already.
Mm-hmm.
Crap, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, when's the service bulletin going to get done? The engine reps aren't going to be due to be on site till next week. Fun,
yeah,
you know.
Yep. Or how about this? Like, so on top of having the part on site or having a part relatively near you, then you also have to factor in like transportation costs, right? Especially like for guys on AOG or aircraft on ground. If your plane is home based here, but it flew and it had to land somewhere else, and that place is like some like just basic runway, very minimal traffic controlling and all that stuff, and all the parts and whatnot is at your home base, and you have to truck that over to where the plane is. Now we're talking extra cost upon cost, which can seriously drive up everything.
Well, and actually, it's funny you bring that up. So it's actually cheaper, right? So let's say I'm in Van Nuys, and the plane is out in Palm Springs, about a 4-hour drive. And you're like, okay, it's actually cheaper for me to stop by that vendor's warehouse and pick up parts and take it with me en route, rather than them, especially if we kind of know what the issue is already, rather than me driving all the way out there going, yeah, it's this, and then having to place a part or on order. Now I'm waiting another hour for that to be processed, and then another hour for the driver to show up at the warehouse, the courier service. Mm-hmm. And then paying that courier fee and waiting for them to drive all the way out there and drop that part off to you, right? So you just now add an additional 6+ hours onto your cost time by using a courier service. So many times it's actually faster. So like in my case, I would always like, even if I wasn't 100% sure, I'm like, well, it's this system, and quick look over the manual. The fault isolation tells me that here's the 2 cheapest things right out the gate. Let me stop and pick those up and run with it. And if they're not, whenever I head back home, I'll just swing by and drop them off. No harm, no foul.
Right.
But at least I already have them with me in case that is the issue. But yeah, you can sort of save money on that aspect of it.
That's true. I never actually thought of that way. Assuming that they have the part there and you're able to pick it up too, right? Or
yeah, well, and again, that back to, like you said, back to the size of your operations system, your part one, you know, your 91 or whatever you're operating under. But if it's a bigger company with deeper pockets, obviously you're going to have more parts on site versus your company that only has maybe 5 aircraft total. you're not going to be obviously keeping as much as you would be if you had 400 aircraft.
Very true. Very true. This is going to components. I'm going to tangent a little bit. When it comes to you got the cost of the components, and then you got the man-hour cost to go with it, right? So, like, you have a component, for sure it's going to cost this much, but then you're also got to tack on like how much it's going to take to put that in, right? Put that in, test it, verify good, and all that stuff. On a good day, you probably have a minimal team, maybe 1 to 3, sometimes 4. But each of those, you're charging man hours to put that in and to test, verify good. And I remember having this issue with a lot of operation managers or a lot of airline component cost analysts, where they say like, well, we want you to put this in, but we want it done fast, so stick more people on it. What? Oh, excuse me? Like, oh, okay. I mean, but what are they going to do? Right? Like,
right. So a 2-man job, like more hands in there are just going to get in the way.
Right. Like, what is he going to do? Run my tools for me? That's a good spend.
Now that could also be time and cost savings if you use them as your parts runner.
Yes.
So like using, for example, again, back in Van Nuys, are working on the airfield, and we had the parts warehouse for the one vendor was about 30 minutes to the east, about halfway between there and Burbank. And then with traffic lights and all that, it took about 30-ish minutes just to get over there, and another 30 or so back. So it's about an hour round trip. So if you got 2 guys who can stay working and 1 guy to start running parts and do paperwork, that's also can be a time saving factor in there. But again, that person's still charging to the job. So at the end of the day, what are you really saving? You'd really have to sit down and crunch those numbers.
Right. And in a good scenario like that, yes, like the money is worth the spend because you're gaining in time. But then how many jobs have you been on where there are just too many hands trying to fit into the jar? And I was just like, well, it's nice having you guys here, but it's not getting the job done any faster. Like, if anything, you got the job done just slightly under the recommended completion time, which is kind of good. But now you've just upcharged your cost by however many people extra you tacked onto the job. Like,
well, or like a lot of vendors will do, right? They'll let they'll charge the full time for the 2 guys working to that work order. The guy running parts, they might only, the maintenance company might only have them charge a quarter to half of their time at a reduced rate, and then they'll eat the rest of that payment for that guy out of their own pocket, out of the maintenance vendor's own pocket. So at least they're not taking a big hit on it, but they've reduced costs for the customer, had to pay a little bit out of pocket, and then thus, the airline, the operation side is happy, and then you get a repeat customer, I guess, how you want to look at that.
That's true. I'm glad you brought that up, because my whole thought process of it all was like, you just drove up your man hours just to replace a part, which typically only would have taken, I don't know, X amount of people, but then you tacked on so many more. And that typically doesn't happen a lot. And it's kind of understood already, like, this person's just going to be the parts runner, or this person is just going to be like the specialist for NDI or something like that. And that's it.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, I mean, that's true too. If they're not there actually doing work, they're there for one specific portion of the job, which is the NDI component. You pull it all apart, they NDI it in the back of their rig, and then they give you the thumbs up of approval, hand you the paperwork, they leave, and they're only charged an hour or whatever it took, and then your parts back in your hand, you're reinstalling and reassembling, and then ops checking from there. So, but I guess it'd be all job dependent in that instance.
Right.
So we've used the word component quite a bit. So I assume most of our listeners know, but just in case there's somebody listening that doesn't know, in aircraft maintenance, a component is defined as any self-contained part, combination of parts, sub-assemblies, or units which perform a distinctive function necessary to the operation of a system. Maintenance costs associated with this rotable or repairable part can be classified into the following categories. at line replaceable unit level for the airline. So component maintenance costs can either be considered on-wing performance or off-wing support. Now, what is on-wing performance? Reliability, time on wing, life limits, soft limits, predictability, modification, cost effectiveness, engineering and maintenance best practices. Now, off-wing support is repair cycle, repair, overhead cost, your TAT, your fill rates, scrap rates. I'm not sure what NFF is, actually. I'll have to look that one up. Rogue units, and then obsolescence. Then for your parts management, availability, price escalations, and warranty.
Ooh, that was, yeah. I think we've covered all aspects of that in our experiences. And I'm going to be honest, man, like the off-wing support is probably like the largest headache out of all of it.
I would think so too, yeah.
Especially like when it comes to like the scrap rates, the availability, the warranty even, or price escalation. Oh my God, man. Like I think I've had a way larger headache than that, than to actually like figure out how this modified part is going to somehow fit into this version A side of the aircraft. Like I got a version B and I got to somehow make it fit into version A. I'm like, what the fuck do I do this?
Yeah. Well, I'm looking at this and trying to dumb it down for myself, right?
Uh-huh.
Looking at the on-wing performance, it looks like stuff that you could almost control as a maintainer or maintenance group at the local level. You can handle most of those issues. You're tracking most of those issues in your logbooks or whatever, but local to the hangar you're working in or the airfield you're working in. But the off-wing support is, hey, this component's messed up. We got to pull it off. It's got to go back to the manufacturer for overhaul, repair, whatever the case is. So once it leaves your facility, your hangar, essentially, for most maintainers, it's out of sight, out of mind. And it's in the support realms, hands at that point. And then for tracking purposes, as it makes its way through the shipping lanes and hitting all the wickets to go back to the vendor, then getting status updates on it while it's at vendor, any additional costs because they found additional damage, and then tracking all the way back till it gets in the hangar's hands. So your pro soups at that point are typically tracking that all the way through. But so for a local maintainer, you're really going to care when it's in your hands,
right? Revisiting,
which you could use deficiency reporting, I guess, is for that off-wing, right? As a tracking system,
right? Going back to what you were saying about NFF, so NFF is no fault found. So it means like you have a part that's bad, but you couldn't find out what the heck's causing it.
Oh yeah, like we always say, C&D, cannot duplicate.
Yes, and for like the guys on the line, aka us, it's one of those like I have no idea what the fuck it is. It's not broken, but it's just we can't figure out what the hell's wrong with it. So depending on what.
Only happens in flight. Well, I can't duplicate flight on the ground, so
right. Oh, that reminds me of like when certain aircrew members will come in and say like, "Hey, the weight on wheels switch doesn't work in the air." I'm like, no shit, you don't say. Yeah. Well, repeat that one more time. Like, say it slower, and then hear yourself. Weight on wheels does not work in the air. Is it clicking yet? Like, right. How are you going to have weight on the wheels in the...
You start reading some of the write-ups and you're going, hold on. You read it like 6 times to yourself because you're like, maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I'm reading it wrong. You know what I mean? I have to be reading it wrong. Nobody would write this down. Not in all seriousness. Right. Like, are you guys fucking with me? Is this a prank? Like, is it somebody's birthday? So what's going on? Wait a minute. It's July. It's nowhere near April 1st. Is this like a new trend? Is that what's going on? Is this a TikTok trend? Who's filming me right now? Where's that camera? Right. Ashley, where you at? Hey, you got me. You had me. You guys are serious. Ooh. Well. So, but yeah, like no fault found or could not duplicate. In most cases, right, depending on what the part is, it's kind of like the nice way of saying like it's not broken. Like you fucked up. It's an error on you. Just gonna let that slide. But in most cases, when it's a major fault and you cannot figure out where the hell it's coming from or what's wrong with it,
that's when you guys would, or that's when we would send it over to the vendor or whoever's the next higher level in the component chain. Like, we have no idea what the hell is wrong with it. Do whatever X-ray fine tuning you got to do to figure out what the heck's wrong with it, because we couldn't. On our level, we don't have the ability to do so.
Well, and if you're lucky enough to have a back shop, you might be able to pull a component on the line, take it into the hangar, and somebody can bench test it for you real quick and give you a solid answer. But I think I've worked in very few environments where that was actually a thing. That was mostly, military has that option quite a bit. Mm-hmm. But for most AOG and other work, I mean, you're always out in the field somewhere, like Six was saying earlier, some podunk airfield, and they barely got runway lights, let alone any support.
Right? And when the runway lights is just like leftover Christmas tree lights, like, thanks, thanks. I actually went to an airfield like that. Well, it wasn't like an airfield; it was more like a parking lot. And a bunch of dudes were just like aviation enthusiasts, and they just decided to turn that into a runway. Wait, how do you guys land at night? Like,
yeah, man, what form do you fill out for that?
Right? It's like, oh, we just turned on all our porch lights, and that's the night landing light. Like, are you serious? Really? How's this legal?
Man, were they all on like ultralights or legit aircraft?
No, like the what's the smallest like prop aircraft? Like, it was one of those, like, real small, like things, like maybe like a 1-person plane, if that. Yeah, like I can't remember the plane.
Dragger or something.
Yeah, or like a little puddle hopper, but it was real shady. Like, there's no fucking way you guys are taking off like this, right? Like, you guys would totally get in trouble for this.
Yeah, no kidding. Big time
trouble. But yeah, so that's NFF, and that's on the off-wing support side. I'm sorry to tell you off like that, but it clicked as soon as you were talking about time on wing and predictability.
Well, and as you were talking, I was scrolling down through the article, and then I found an effective fault identification by line mechanic is a prerequisite. Only confirmed failure should be included. No fault found. NFF is a major issue causing high administrative burden and wasted expenditure. So, everyone, I could have just read a little further and answered my own question.
An effective fault identification? Oh my God.
You know what, though? I mean, people kind of dog on that. And yeah, it's good to have good troubleshooting skills, which you'll develop over time. But a solid fault isolation manual is just, there's nothing else like it. I mean, it just sends you in the right direction, and you can typically get to where you need to be.
Yes. And I think that kind of goes into like the interpretation of it too, because some individuals, they overread certain things, right? That's kind of like when you have an individual who argues with you and they say like, well, the publication didn't tell me not to do that. Like, yes, it did.
Or how about this? You get fault codes and it says like 5 NES. And so you go to your fault isolation manual. If it's not a well-written fault isolation manual, you're like, oh, great, we have 5 NES fault identification. Christ, let me read down through these and see what each one means. You know what I mean? And then you got to like try to puzzle it together and go on, is that what happened in flight? Well, sort of, but not 100%. What's the next one say? Did that one work? No. And then 3 hours go by and you're like, hey, we finally figured it out. But what a waste of 3 hours,
Right. So like, or you get like those fault isolations where it's like very drastic, shall must do actions. Like, if you're popping this light, you got to replace the transmission. Like, say what now? Right. And then you kind of like, yeah, that can't be. That's too drastic. And then it's like this very fine print where it says like, oh, like check diode for continuity or some shit. Like, I feel like this should have been step 1, not replace transmission.
Nav light out, replace the inverter. Wait a minute. Hold on. I think there's something else I could do before that.
Right.
The inverter.
Right. That's a pretty drastic step. Maybe we should dial back.
Can I just try the bulb first?
Can we just backpedal it a bunch of times? So that reminds me, whenever we do like night flights, and air crew or a pilot would always say like, hey, my such and such caution light is out. Like, And instead of being like, okay, let's like trace it back to see what's going on, or see if it's just a burnt bulb or some shit, or they pulled the breaker, they just say, someone would just say like, well, did you spit on it? Like, excuse me? Yeah, did you spit on it? Like, take the bulb out, spit on it, put it back in. Did it turn on? I'm like, yeah. Like, oh, and then it's fine. I'm like, what? That's the fix? Just spit on it? Like, how do you write that one up?
Well, I've had somebody tell me like with an exciter box on an engine, I'm like, yeah, it's like intermittent starting. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you're like, open the cowl, take your hammer, take a soft mallet and smack the exciter box and see if it starts. I'm not smacking that multi-$1,000 part with a soft mallet. See if it starts. Like, well, if it's bad, you got to replace it anyways. And I'm like, sure, but what if it's something else and I just made it bad? Just smack it. Sure, you smack it and then starts up and they're like, all right, shut it down, start again. Then it won't start. And you're like, smack it again. It's like, all right, it was obviously something loose internal to that. And you're like, I'm impressed with your knowledge of the system. You've obviously ran into this before, but just smack it with a hammer? That seems pretty rudimentary, you know?
Right. This is not like any Nintendo, man, where you just blow at it and it works again. Like, come on, man.
But you know what's funny is I've done that with cannon plugs. I do it all the time. Like, oh, yeah, we're getting this intermittent fault. Disconnect the cannon plugs, blow it out with some compressed air, or not compressed air, but like air duster.
Yep.
And then reseat it, and then it works. And you're like, huh, that's all it took. Right. Yeah, have you tried turning it on and off again?
Right. A lot of people will joke about it, but that actually works, right? Because that's the most violent time of any electrical component is when you turn it on, turn it off. And somewhere along those lines, when you engage power, release power, whatever diodes or relays or switches or whatever the heck that's in there resets itself, and then it works again. We're like, son of a bitch. That's all it took. But then you have like some drastic measures, like some fault isolation or some mechanics interpretation of a fault isolation. Oh, just smack it a couple times with a mallet, or just replace the inverter. Like, say what now? Then you see like an inverter with like, or a exciter box with all sorts of dents on it.
Yeah, you're like, I'm not buying this off. But anybody in their right mind would say, oh, I smacked it with a hammer and it worked, so it'll go again. No, you're like, oh, I just proved that it's at fault, so now I'm going to replace it. I hope to God nobody out there would actually just let it go.
Right. Or I seen another one with like filter poppets. Like the filter pop, like, oh, just push it back in. I'm like, but the filter poppet means it's plugged. I'm like, no. Just pop it back in and let it fly. I'm like, if it pops again, then you have something wrong. Like, but what if we're not here to catch it? Oh, just pop it back in again. Like, are you fucking serious, man? I feel like we're defeating the system here.
Oh, big time. It's just those workarounds, air quotes, huh? Yeah.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about, since we got into it with time on wing. Now, I'm not going to lie. When the second I heard time on wing, I'm thinking like stuff you actually mount to the wing, right? Like say for military applications, like a external fuel pod, or in the airline sense is the actual engine, because it's air quote externally mounted to the air or to the wing. But to clarify that, time on wing doesn't necessarily mean it's on the wing. What it really means is it's in the aircraft, like it's installed where it's supposed to be. And the reason why this is important, between our experiences and what this article proves, is a number of airlines and organizations use mean time between unscheduled removals and mean time between failures as their metric for like historical data. What's better is using time on wing, or time since installation, or time since new, or time since last overhaul. I believe that's like your better metric for gauging like the overall performance and reliability of a part that's installed in the plane.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just reading through some of that as well for the metrics side of it.
Yeah. And some other places, you know, they'll track like, what's it, mean time between incidents, or sometimes that's called failure. Same. mean time between failure, mean time between incidents. Now, you'll probably speak better on incidents where it's not necessarily means like, oh, something destroyed itself. It just means like there was a air quote failure and we just classify that as an incident.
Yeah, like it could just be as simple as a generator failure, right?
Right.
That just goes time between, it adds to your time between incidents. But one thing you have to do as well is, if you've been fortunate enough to go, a long time between incidents, you need to readjust your incidents, because if you don't do that, you risk, you could get yourself to the point where you can be like, oh, I can tank 3 birds into the ground and I still haven't had a bad month per my metrics. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think that's the biggest thing about any metric or a statistic is you really got to ensure that your measuring device or your measuring algorithms are on point, because like you just alluded to, you can have like, say, a threshold that's so high and you can destroy or have half your fleet down for whatever reason, but you haven't crossed your threshold, so your mean time between incidents is fairly low. So it's kind of like a given. Like, guys on the line can probably notice this right away when your mean time between incidents is still normal, but you can see outside that your fleet is like down 3, like MVP just said. It's probably a good time to readjust and figure out like, okay, something here's not measuring right, or somebody's not reporting this correctly to make the charts fit.
Exactly. So, looking here at what, kind of determines time on wing, it says time on wing is also determined by the OEM vendor mandated life limits and operator introduced soft time. In some cases, airlines can extend life limits, provided they have supporting data through either their own engineering team or external partner, such as an MRO.
Now, life limits, that's like manufacturing, that's the manufacturer knows like this is the point of failure where this component would just totally trash itself. Or it's the limit between next overhaul interval, right? Like you can only do it this much before you hit that interval, and then either A, it's going to destroy itself, or it's going to risk failure.
Yeah, such as like every 200 hours you gotta change your engine oil, or every 400 hours change your engine oil. Every 200 you're doing a soap sample,
mm-hmm.
And then at 5,000 hours you got to pull it off for a hot section or engine overhaul or whatever the case may be, as mandated by the engine manufacturers.
Right. And these life limits, they exist for a reason, again, because of failure. Now, there is a little bit of a deviation to this where depending on what kind of component it is, depending on the manufacturer, depending on what it's doing, it can be anywhere between 5 to 15%. And that's a lot depending on what the component is. Example is like, say, like a transmission. It has a life limit of 400,000 hours. Example, like I'm blowing these numbers up. I'm totally making this up, but let's pretend for a second, like your total life limit for this transmission is 400,000 hours. Your 10% deviation would be like 40,000 hours. And that's a lot if you consider that for a flight hour time. Like, but then you have some other components, like say an engine. You have 200 hours before you perform maintenance task X. And your 10%, that's say example 10%, is only going to be 20, which is probably like another flight max.
Right.
But most flights, you always want to built in like that extra 10% just in case it has to divert or it has to do an extended flight because airport X or runway X is closed for whatever reason.
Yeah, or you're down on the Gulf Coast and a hurricane's rolling in and you got to get the bird out of that area just to be able to save it. But remember, some of these life limits are imposed just due to, the engineering or of the engine manufacturers determined that these amount of hours we've seen enough material degradation to learn that we've lost X percentage of performance from that motor.
Right.
Especially when it comes to your hot sections. I've done some borescopes in some hot sections and seen pitted holes worn into the vanes and stuff back there, and it was still within its normal hours, but that vehicle is operating also in a more sea salty air environment. So you got to understand those too when you're looking at these parts. There might be one set of parts for operating in drier, deserty climates, but then there's also going to be a separate set for if you're operating in separate maintenance intervals if you're operating in a saltwater environment.
Right. And I think that bleeds into the soft limit or soft time limits of this article. Like, the manufacturers have a hard down limit. Like, this is your do not cross line. But like MVP said, like, you could have other external factors or external pressures that are working against that component. And so you as the line prep mechanic or you as the quality assurance person or whoever your engineering team is, you can impose like earlier limits to this component. You can decrease your interval time between next maintenance due. You can increase your frequency of maintenance because of the environment or external factors that you're in. And that's really based on what the aircraft itself is doing and where you're actually at. So that'd be what a soft limit is. So like,
yeah, and I know, like, from my own personal experience, a lot of operators will try to use that soft limit time as much as they can, just so they maximize. Because everything comes down to the dollars and cents. Mm-hmm. But just to maximize the time they have, they can use that component before it's got to be pulled, and they're spending X amount of thousands of dollars for maintenance and overhaul. But remember, there are some manufacturers have limitations, right? Before you're approved to use that soft limit, you might have to do some sort of, staying on engines, power assurance check. Right. So you say, hey, we want to go into the 15% overfly on this. All right, we'll do a power assurance check, send us those numbers, and we'll let you know if you're squared away.
Yes.
And so you have to do that.
Yep.
But that adds time on too.
Yep, absolutely. Like, especially when you're considering implementing soft intervals, like you just said, you have to consider the operational constraints, the disruption impact of failures, and then whatever the manufacturer says you have to do prior to enabling that soft limit. I would say that when a component is on wing or installed, your cost is relatively less compared to everything else. And the reason why is because when it's installed, it's doing what it's supposed to do. So your chances of incurring cost is minimal or lesser because it's doing what it's supposed to do. It's only when you incur a failure or you're hitting that interval time between next maintenance intervals, that's where you're going to drive up the cost. Or it's one of a conditional inspection that somehow dives into that component. It's like it's not associated with the fault, but since it's in the way, you got to take it out, and now you just incurred an extra cost because now you got to do all those other operation checks and functional tests and all this other stuff to air quote green up that aircraft. I mean, this article has a lot of very pertinent info, and does the average line mech use most of this? Yes, but it's more like a subconscious thing. Because that you're so used to just, this is what it means to take this component out. This is what it means to put a component in. This is what it means when we have to do this inspection or we have to remove it for air code high time or life cycle time. It's already automatic. It's just now it's translated to what it actually means through the whole chain of events. Like, especially us now that we're doing the off-wing support, we see all these numbers and oh my fucking God, man, numbers.
Yeah, so many numbers.
And so like all these write-ups for whatever they're for, it adds up over time. And majority of the line mechs are not going to see this overtime trend, but this is where we have the decisions like, hey, you can only do this much, or you can only receive this much, or you can only do this many, or you have to do this many intervals because reason X. And most line mechanics, they'll just say like, oh, fuck, here they go giving us more work, or here we go having our hands tied again. Like, and it's not just to fuck with you because we've been there. We felt that. Like, are you guys just fucking with me? Like, is that what we're doing? But this is really all part of the shuffle game to keep everything in line with each other. So we don't induce a failure or we're not overflying a failure.
Right, exactly. And part of that comes back to how to prevent that, right? It comes into the predictability aspect of it. So what is the predictability? Predictive maintenance tools can help operators to cut costs and reduce downtime. Airlines can take better advantage of increasing amount of aircraft operational data available to support decisions and adjust maintenance planning. So, for example, several OEMs offer predictive maintenance tools: Airbus Time Health Monitoring, Boeing's Airplane Health Management, Honeywell's Predictive Trend Monitoring and Diagnostics, and Pratt & Whitney's Advanced Diagnostics and Engine Management. So with those tools, you can access, aircraft, the data from the aircraft. That helps also provide enhanced fault forwarding, troubleshooting, and historical maintenance information.
Yes.
So that also kind of tells you, like, hey, with engine serial number, whatever, it's had a history of smoke and hot sections sooner than this other side.
Or another one.
Serial number. I'm sorry.
Yeah, another one I've seen that too is when you have like a lot number or a
bad batch.
Bad batch, or it's a batch like where it's like, well, they changed vendors, so like your reliability is going to increase or decrease by so many percentage. So whatever your interval is, you got to increase or decrease because of that change. And for the most part, you won't even realize, like, oh, whatever, it looks like a filter, it goes in, or it looks like an engine component, it goes in. But you didn't take the time to realize like who manufactured it, or if there was a notice that this batch of serial numbers were better or less, and then you're thinking everything's gravy. Next thing you know, you overfly and induce a fault. Like, oh my
god. Or the manufacturer, when they build their components, whoever they use to build their specific component or the guts to their specific component, they might have switched up a vendor and who provides diodes at 15 cents cheaper a piece, and next thing you know, you weren't having air data system issues, and now you can't seem to keep the aircraft up without coming down code 3 for an air data issue.
Right. Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yep. I will say though, like doing a lot of this predictive maintenance, you're going to see a spike in no faults found for some time, because if your system is not fully set up and you start implementing this, you're going to see a big spike in the very beginning, because you're going to have aircraft that are generally healthy, or for the most part are healthy. So you're going to have a whole lot, no fault found, or could not duplicate gripe, or time since new is still relatively close. So your trend is going to be all out of whack for a little bit, but it'll slowly tail off and you start getting the actual trend of what's going on. But that's assuming that the data feeding into it is accurate, which gets into the whole whip about your write-ups. Like,
garbage in, garbage out type deal.
Yes, like, did you use the right fault code when you signed it off? Did you use the right repair code when you signed it off? What did you actually do, right? And I was joking to one of our listeners about this, like, say an engine run. The write-up would just say, perform engine run, and then engine run complete. Okay, for what? Well, what did you do the engine run for? Like, was it a wash? Was it a function test? Did you replace something? What the fuck did you do?
Yeah, what drove that maintenance?
Yeah, and it sounds very nitpicky, especially when you start getting to like who can smash your bag for it. Like, I remember we had this talk with Frush some time ago, where the more room you give to interpret for someone to interpret, the less likely you are to get in trouble, because whatever manuals that is available, it doesn't specify, so you kind of just go along with it to make it as understandable as possible. But if it can be helped, that's key word. If it can be helped, use the best and most accurate measures when you're signing these off, because when all this gets fed into the loop of figuring out where our problems are, you're just inducing a false positive, or you're inducing a false negative, and that throws everything out of whack.
Very much true. So I was reading through here about a cost, benefit, and risk analysis are common methodologies to justifying a modification implementation. Now, I'm just going to cut the modification implementation, but talking about the cost, benefit, and risk analysis, right? So you and I have had that conversation, but that is something that I am now kind of pushing forward within the program that I work is risk, or becoming risk based, and identifying a lot of these issues ahead of time, getting them in front of a risk board, pushing them up to the appropriate channels to make the decision, i.e., do we spend the money or not, right? What's the severity of it? If I spend $5 million now, am I going to save $45 million down the road from down vehicles and whatever else, right? So that's something for everyone to think about is identifying risk within your own organization. It could be one of those, hey, if we don't get our maintenance manual updated, we're going to continue inducing damage, maintenance damage cost of $10 million every time we do this job because the manuals are lacking data into an unseasoned maintainer on that airframe. They're going to follow what the steps in the manual say, so they can't be held at fault, but they are going to damage this component each and every time. So, things like that are something to keep an eye out for within your own organization, and punch those up. Don't be afraid to punch those up and try to get action, because at least at the end of the day, nobody can say, "Well, nobody told us." Nobody told us we had these issues.
And risk doesn't just mean damage. Risk could also mean like driving up costs. It could also mean affecting schedule, because that on-time performance is a big one too. So if it affects your schedule, if it affects your performance, if it affects cost, those are all part of your risk assessment. And anyone can do this, really. How many line mechanics typically do this on the reg? Probably not many. But if you're a seasoned, or you're looking to be seasoned, and you're trying to actually make an impact for your shop, definitely deep dive into risk assessment, because that is what's going to separate you from the regular average Joe mech who's just day in, day out just turning wrenches, to a person who's actually going to impact and make life whether easier or harder for everyone else in the future.
Right. And if I can add some things to think about as you're identifying and writing your risk, choose your wording, right? So saying like, oh, if we don't do this, then we're going to, then something bad will happen. No, you got to put up there. Then we run the risk of losing missions, losing revenue flights, whatever. That gets the attention of the people higher up in the chain. And also, if you can add a cost value to, even if it's a rough estimate, you can provide a cost value, because again, everybody who's going to be making those decisions, whether this is a legit risk and we need to throw money at it to get it resolved, they're not looking at what the actual issue is. They're looking at what it's going to cost. Yes. So always try to use verbiage where it'll gather their attention or catch their attention, and then a dollar amount that they can use to make their call off of.
Right. That's spot on. And there's a whole math thing, and there's so many books about that, how you guys want to go about it. But like MVP said, just choose your words carefully. Try to tack it on a number, or like a value number if you could. And then like consequence versus likelihood, right? Like, oh, this is bad, big consequence, terrible. This will crash everything. But the likelihood of it happening is like next to none. So is it really a risk? Maybe, maybe not. But it could be.
And also put dates in there, right? Hey, if we don't get this done by this time, we're going to miss this mission. I.e., customer is going to be upset. We're gonna lose money, contracts, whatever the case may be, because we're not reliable. Or if you've seen something that's already a problem, don't push it up as a risk, right? Push it up as an issue. It's happening now. We have a problem that we need to address.
Yes, most definitely. Oh, man, like I'm so glad you brought that up, because that was in my head, and we somehow mind melded across the time and space. And yeah, most definitely, please. That's probably like the biggest thing, because what that does, it adds value to both yourself. It gives safety to you guys and the shop. And then for all the bean counters up there, they can actually make decisions that help. It sounds very cliche and at a 10,000 foot level, or operational versus executive level, but in the end, if it's like what we MVP said earlier, garbage in, garbage out. If you feed them falsified data or you feed them incomplete data, you're gonna get incomplete results, and that's something we've seen way too many times on the line. It's something that we could wish we could just not do without. And if we could just get like a good fill in the gaps, that'd be freaking fantastic. And really, risk assessment and cost analysis is probably one of the better means of bridging that gap.
Yeah, I think it's one of the ways many organizations, just even outside of aviation, most big corporations have some sort of risk management program, and it's just how you continue improving processes and everything else, right? Nothing lasts forever, and your processes for managing 5 customers no longer works when you have 10 or 15. So things need to be constantly looked at and reviewed. And again, people high in the chain making those decisions, they might not see some of the issues that are at the floor level, but it's on them to make that decision. So that's where you as the maintainer has to come in and identify those. Because if you think just because you see it doesn't mean they see it.
Yes. So what's some of the best practices to enhance on wing performance, right? Just based off this article and kind of summarize some of the stuff we've been saying. Concentrate on a good modification policy. Like try to adopt a model which considers the economic environment and the business model of your airline or your program or your airfield, whatever. Because if you're planning for this and the economy crashes or your economy ups and you're not ready for it, then you're screwed.
Right. You have to have a little foresight in there.
Yep. Choose wisely between running component on condition or using soft time and hard time limits. That's a big one. Consider opportunity costs like AOG. Ooh, I think we kind of...
Yeah, it's a big one. We touched on that a couple of times this episode.
Yep. Optimize task intervals if escalations are permitted. Sometimes a de-escalation that goes into your threshold, that goes into your deviation and your maintenance intervals or your inspection intervals. If it's something that you can manage and something that you can control, by all means, please. Because go ahead.
I was going to say, one of the ones that stuck out to me here was be aware of commercial agreements and their vendor warranties, component pooling agreements, aircraft leasing contracts, right? So there's some positives and negatives in there when it says be aware. Vendor warranties, if you got a part and you install it and you get 5 flight hours out of it and it craps out, I think that falls under a warranty. So these companies will never reach out and say, oh, you had a failed part, we'll send you a new one. No, it's going to be on you to know that there's that warranty there and to reach back to them and basically, here, give us another part. You gave us a lemon here. Component pooling agreements are kind of what I talked about earlier when you have a location, but all these components have to be kept in one location that 5 different programs pull the same part from. Something else to be in mind, right? You sometimes you can't avoid it just depending on where you're operating, but definitely something to think about when you have a contingency, when you need to identify contingency stocks. Yep. And then leasing contracts, like we all know, leasing can be good or bad depending on how you're viewing it, but a lot of leasing contracts will cover maintenance costs, right? You're just paying for the use of the vehicle. It's your air taxi. You're flying around. Something breaks. You're just like, it broke. And they send their own people out to fix it. But could be the other way where they're like, hey, you pay for this. And then the fine print says, and if it breaks while you're out flying around in it, it's on you to fix.
Right. I think I've seen so many examples of that both ways where like there's a fine print where it says you assume all risk and responsibility once you take the plane. So it's almost like a rental agreement, but it's more like it's
high risk, high stakes.
Yeah. It's like we're giving you the plane, but if you break it, you bought it.
Yeah. Do you want the extra insurance? Yeah, I think I do in this case.
Yes, most definitely. Pay the extra insurance. It's worth it. Right? It's just like a rental car. Like you're not 100% of what could go wrong, so you might want to throw in the extra $30 or however much it is to kind of cover yourself to a certain degree. Ensure
Touching on, yeah,
Go
I was
ahead.
going to say, touching on something we've already talked about, but ensuring accurate and maintainable reporting by line mechanics.
Oh,
Again, it's on you, the maintainer, to make sure the right information is getting input.
yep, yep, most def. Track cost effectiveness. I mean, that's a very big number crunch. If you guys want to get into that, by all means, that's a beast in itself. But
Some nerd stuff.
it enlightens you so much, though. Just like, wow, I can't believe. Yeah, you look back at all your previous thinkings before that, and you're like, wow, I was really, really not being considerate of all these other factors. I'm so glad I looked into it. Assuming you want to try.
Right. Numbers and money drive everything.
Yep. Uh, Track high, no fault found components, issue maintenance tips to avoid reoccurrences. Oh my god. That's like one of the hugest ones. Like we were just talking about, like, oh, just rap at it or just slap it a couple of times with a mallet.
So you also need to be consider that too. If you have repeat reoccurs, right, your customer, there might be something you're not tracking, behind the scenes stuff, but customers often track repeat reoccur instances. And so if you're not reporting that accurate data, oftentimes there's award fee hits or money fee hits. You guys are maintaining this vehicle for us, but this is the 5th time in a row we've had a repeat recur, this same write-up type thing. But it could be the air crew misinterpreting what they're seeing. You said, no, that wasn't the actual instance. It was this. So again, it comes back to the accurate reporting, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We've had the same issue, replaced the part 3 times and it hasn't fixed it. And we've tried nothing else. That one kind of falls on us. But if it's the air crew and they're writing down the same thing every time because they're refusing to look any further into the flight manual, just because they're being lazy, you could also come back and say, no, we're not taking any money loss from that. That's on your side.
Yep.
You guys have given us false information. It's taken us extra time to research and troubleshoot to figure out what is actually the problem.
Yep. I like how you said that because that's literally the next bullet. Like, educate cockpit crew on specific items to better understand what affects components' life on wing, e.g. heavy landing, impacts on landing gear life, high-speed taxi impact, sharp steering angles on wheels, writing up detailed defect information or non-detailed information like weight on wheel switch doesn't work in flight. Like, are you serious?
Are you telling me that you suggest that I tell a pilot recommendations on how they can be better? Well, I might as well go talk to the wall over here. Hey, Mr. Pilot, I know I'm a mechanic here. I'd just like to tell you some things I think you could improve upon.
Right.
To which they give you the old double guns and then they call you shooter or something like that as they wander into the pilot's lounge. Don't give it a shit.
Right. Thanks for that, sport. I'm a freaking full send as I feel like it. Like, all right, man, go for it.
I'm a pilot. Yeah.
Right. Don't come crying to me when you get a torque split.
And then provide feedback to training departments in order for them to revise course content.
Oh
my God, if that isn't an ongoing battle in my life.
Oh my God. My chest. I felt that.
Yeah, I think I had a mini seizure right now. Partial stroke.
Right. No, training, I mean, we could probably do a whole other episode on that, on why training is seriously lacking on a lot of things. But a good number of it is just the data that we're feeding them, right? If we're not giving them accurate stuff, they're not going to know no better. So here you go. Everything works as it should, but no, the fuck it doesn't.
Right. Yeah. I mean, in many instances, your training personnel aren't coming from the floor. They haven't spent any time working that vehicle or vehicles, have no maintenance background. They read what's on a PowerPoint slide and thumbs up you're trained. But they know nothing about what's changed in the processes and the vehicles and the materials in special tooling. So it's definitely, you got to get with them every so often and say, hey, we got to update this stuff, which is a very big thing of what I am going through right now within my own program.
Yeah,
it is a never ending battle as of recently.
Yep. right? Or like you get some training resources that they've had some time on the line, but it's been so long, right? Like they were used to you working on version A, and here you are on version X. Like you're a little bit behind the times, man. Like
Yeah, they were on the Vietnam era bird, and it was all analog and fly by cable, and now we're fly by wire and everything's digital, right? Glass cockpits and whatever else. They're again behind the curve, like you said.
right. I've seen like some 787 demonstrations, and the aircraft is like it's almost smart enough to talk back to you, and some of them do. Well, not in the way like we are like you would expect like an actual conversation, but they can tell you everything that's going on. They can tell you everything what's happening with it. So it makes like the fault isolation that much easier. But again, like it's one of those like you got to be smart enough to understand. Like it's almost too smart where like it starts talking like these big fancy words and you like what the fuck is this thing trying to tell me, right? Just are you broke or are you not, man?
Right.
But definitely like with especially with training, training is like what MVP said, it's an ongoing thing. But the more information you're able to feed them, the better equipped they will be to throwing out stuff that's more up to date to the field or whatever the new mechanics actually hit the line. And that's gonna kind of fall in its own predictability. Like, how do we train up this person to be ready 3 years later for something that we think is gonna happen 3 years later?
Yep. Oh, and that comes back into your risk assessment too, right? Regarding the training, you as the individual working the floor, you throw it out there. Hey, if we don't update current training slides for whatever processes, we're going to run the risk of not getting all personnel the correct data, and they're going to come out here and cause more problems, more headaches.
Oh yes, absolutely. They're just gonna drive up more costs, like we said. It's gonna drive up your schedule, as we said. All the wazoos that you don't want, and it's something that could have been completely avoided had someone done the cost analysis and the risk assessment from the get go. But again, garbage in, garbage out, everybody. So,
and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, man. I mean, we hit a lot on that one, and
yeah, we could probably do another episode, maybe and hit the off wing side of things. We just covered on wing really today.
Yeah, we could definitely would. We definitely should. Especially when it comes to off wing stuff, there's layers upon layers of that stuff. So, I mean, on wing stuff is pretty straightforward. Put it in, check it, track your intervals, and then overhaul it. And all the little nuances that come there. But with off wing stuff, oh my god, there's so many layers to this stuff. And honestly, like for any line mechanic or any newbie that's coming on, if you learn the off wing stuff, you'll be scores ahead of everybody else. Because this is not stuff that you 100% have to know. But if you do know it, it just puts you leagues ahead of everyone else.
Yep, helps you plan a little bit better too. Because if you know the lead time for something's 3 months, you can start building that into your maintenance schedule.
Yep, absolutely.
And then start spacing out certain things. So, okay, I know I got to take this one down. I baselined all my aircraft at this time, and then immediately I'm going to take one out of service to overhaul whatever part. But I know it's a 3-month lead time, so as soon as I get that component back, I drop the next one, and then I space all my birds out.
Right,
3 months from there, 3 months apart.
Absolutely, and that just makes everyone happy because now they have some form of predictability in their schedules. They have some consistency in their schedules, and they know when they have to plus up because a certain job is going to be coming due here in the next couple, however long. And it gives that sense like I know what I got going on, so it's not like a complete toss up. Like I should just cancel all my plans because I don't know what the hell's happening. Mm-hmm. So that definitely plays into a lot. It goes into everyone's schedule, goes into their consistency, it goes into like their mental health, especially because there's one thing, man, like that I've learned over time is my schedule is only so flexible, and I've done those for too many times where I have to be fluid on times when I don't want to.
Yep.
And lately it's now like, nope, there's gonna be some flex, but it's not gonna be fluid. So come up with a better way of predicting what the schedule's going to be.
It flex tilt snaps.
Yes. And that's when you go into burnout and all that other stuff. See our previous episodes on those.
Please see past episodes.
Final thoughts for anything else, MVP?
No, I don't have really anything today. Just try to get planning as much as you can. Hit your risk up. If you need help with identifying risks, hit us up on the social medias, and I'll try to assist as best as I can.
Most def. Very well said. Like I said, we're all about that listener engagement. If you guys have questions, you got stories, you got topics or whatnot, just shoot us a line, either at our socials or on our website, in our emails, whatever the case may be. We are pretty good about getting back to you relatively fast. Or if we don't, we at least say like, hey, we're looking into it. We'll get back to you once we figure it out. And with that said, thanks everybody for listening.
All right. See you, everyone.
We'd like to take this time to thank our patrons for supporting our show and allowing us to continue to make episodes, maintain our gear, and create merch for all of our listeners, with special thanks to Erica Lamont, Chris Hawkins, Ryan Frushour, Dan Schubert, Jenny Dignan, and the ladies of the Dick Talk and Mimosas podcast. Thank you all so much for your support and patronage. Visit our shop at cancelformaintenance.com and grab some swag to show off both your support for us and your prowess as an aircraft technician. If you have ideas for the show or you'd like to be a guest on the show, visit our contact us section and send us a line. We will do what we can to get your ideas or yourself on the show. You can also follow us on social media, such as on Facebook at Cancel for Maintenance, Instagram at Canx, that's CANX for Maintenance Podcast, or on Twitter at CXMX Podcast. Check out some of our affiliates like Rockwell Time, where they make both rugged and classy watches to fit your lifestyle. Use the code CX4MX and save 10% off your purchase. Support us on Patreon. Our patrons get exclusive perks such as access to our Discord, discounts and early access to merch, special patron-only episodes, and so much more. Thank you again so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.